November 2021, the Cartwright family's seemingly perfect life shattered in an instant when a twisted secret led to the brutal death of Vanessa Monroe in her sister's own home. The story begins in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Crestview, where Michael Cartwright and his wife, Laura, had built what appeared to be an idyllic life. Michael, a successful architect in his late 40s, had a reputation for designing some of the most luxurious homes in the area. His work earned him respect and admiration, but it was his charm and charismatic personality that truly made him stand out. Laura, in her early 40s, was known as the warm and caring wife and mother, always involved in charity work and her children's activities. She was the type of woman who would bake cookies for the school fundraiser and never miss a parent-teacher conference. Together, they had two children, both teenagers now, who were the pride of their lives. However, beneath the surface of this picture-perfect family, things were not as serene as they seemed. The first crack appeared when Vanessa Monroe, Laura's younger sister, moved in with them. Vanessa, a striking woman in her late 30s, had just gone through her third divorce and needed a place to stay temporarily. Despite her beauty, Vanessa had a reputation for being manipulative, and many saw her as someone who thrived on chaos. She had a way of getting what she wanted, often leaving others in ruins while she walked away unscathed. Michael had always disliked Vanessa, viewing her as a bad influence on Laura. He found her lack of morals repulsive and was especially put off by her provocative dressing and flirtatious behavior. As Vanessa settled into their home, tension began to rise. Vanessa's presence was felt in every corner of the house. She started wearing Laura's clothes, using her personal items, and even began occupying her space in subtle, yet provocative ways. She would walk around the house in Laura's robes, leave her perfume lingering in the hallways, and spend time in Laura's private bathroom. To Michael, it felt like Vanessa was trying to replace his wife, and this fueled his already deep-seated dislike for her. But Vanessa's actions were more than just provocative. They were deliberate. She seemed to have a deeper, more sinister plan. She began to seduce Michael in small, almost imperceptible ways, brushing against him as she passed, giving him lingering looks that were hard to ignore, and making suggestive comments when Laura wasn't around. Michael found himself in a dangerous mix of anger and unwanted attraction. He tried to resist, but Vanessa was relentless, always finding ways to corner him, to push the boundaries just a little further. And for a while, it seemed like Michael had everything under control. However, as the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house grew thicker. Vanessa's provocations became bolder. She started using Laura's perfume, wearing clothes that were far too revealing for a household setting, and making her presence felt in the most intimate parts of Michael's life. The once peaceful home became a hotbed of tension and deceit, with Michael caught in a web of conflicting emotions, repulsion, guilt, and a growing forbidden attraction. As the days passed, Michael found it increasingly difficult to avoid Vanessa. She seemed to be everywhere, always finding a reason to be alone with him. Vanessa's seduction escalated to a new level when she began openly wearing Laura's silk nightgowns, claiming she couldn't sleep and didn't want to be alone. This move was more than bold. It was brazen, and it pushed Michael's restraint to the limit. One night, when Laura was out of town for a charity event, Vanessa made her boldest move yet. She entered Michael and Laura's bedroom, wearing one of Laura's nightgowns. Michael was initially disgusted and angry. He tried to throw her out, but Vanessa didn't leave. Instead, she started talking about how lonely she was, how every man in her life had used her, and how she had always been jealous of Laura's perfect life. Michael, caught off guard by her vulnerability, found his defenses weakening. He tried to console her, but as she broke down in tears, his attempts to comfort her turned into something much darker. The hatred he felt for her twisted into a passion he could no longer control. That night, Michael crossed a line he never thought he would. The guilt and shame that followed their illicit encounter were almost too much to bear, but Vanessa didn't let him escape the consequences so easily. The affair continued in secret, with Vanessa manipulating Michael into meeting her in secluded parts of the house, or during Laura's frequent absences. For a while, it seemed like they had found a way to balance their twisted relationship, but soon it became clear that Vanessa was not satisfied with just a physical affair. She wanted more. control, power, and ultimately to replace Laura entirely. Vanessa took pleasure in her control over Michael, seeing him as just another man she could dominate. Michael, on the other hand, became increasingly consumed by guilt and shame. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but Vanessa's grip on him was too strong. Their encounters grew more intense, with Vanessa constantly pushing the boundaries, testing Michael's loyalty to his wife, and forcing him into situations where he felt trapped. And as their affair deepened, so did the tension in the household. Vanessa's manipulations were subtle but effective. She started taking over Laura's role in small but significant ways. She began cooking meals for the family, organizing family events, and even caring for the children when Laura was busy. Laura, unaware of the affair, started to feel sidelined in her own home. She attributed Michael's coldness to stress at work, never suspecting that her own sister was the cause of the growing distance between them. But as the days passed, Laura couldn't ignore the subtle changes in her sister's behavior or the growing tension in her marriage. Michael's behavior began to change. He became more distant from Laura, more irritable and paranoid. It wasn't long before Michael started to suspect that Vanessa was deliberately trying to drive a wedge between him and Laura. He noticed how Vanessa seemed to be taking over more of Laura's responsibilities, how she inserted herself into every aspect of their lives, and how she seemed to delight in the chaos she was creating. Vanessa, sensing Michael's growing unease, began to play mind games. She would subtly threaten to expose their affair to Laura, using his fear of losing everything to keep him in line. She started to manipulate situations to make Michael look like the bad guy, pushing him further into a corner. Vanessa's presence in the house became more intrusive, and her manipulations more blatant. She started planting seeds of doubt in Laura's mind, suggesting that Michael might be hiding something. The tension between the sisters, once hidden beneath a veneer of politeness, now started to surface. Laura confronted Vanessa about her overstepping, leading to explosive arguments that left the house charged with hostility. During one particularly heated argument, Vanessa mocked Laura's naivety, accusing her of being boring and predictable. She implied that Michael needed more than what Laura could offer, sowing seeds of doubt in Laura's mind. Laura, hurt and confused, began to suspect that something was going on, but she couldn't bring herself to believe that her sister and husband could betray her so deeply. But as time went on, Laura couldn't ignore the growing distance between her and Michael, nor the increasing presence of Vanessa in every aspect of their lives. The tension in the house reached a boiling point, with every interaction between the sisters turning into a battle of wills. Michael, caught in the middle, found himself torn between his guilt and his growing hatred for Vanessa. He knew that Vanessa was manipulating him, but he was too deep in to extricate himself from the situation. Vanessa, on the other hand, was enjoying the chaos she had created. But soon it became clear that Vanessa's endgame was far more sinister than Michael had realized. The affair reached a breaking point when Vanessa decided to push Michael to the edge. She told him she was pregnant, claiming the child was his. Michael was horrified. He knew that if this were true, it could destroy his marriage and his life. Vanessa used this revelation to tighten her grip on him, demanding that he leave Laura and start a new life with her. Michael, torn between his love for his wife and his fear of Vanessa's threats, started to lose his grip on reality. The situation spiraled out of control when Laura accidentally overheard a conversation between Michael and Vanessa. She learned of the affair and the supposed pregnancy, and her world shattered. Laura confronted Michael in a fit of rage, accusing him of betrayal and demanding to know how long this had been going on. Michael, overwhelmed with guilt and shame, tried to explain, but the damage was done. Laura's heartbreak turned into a cold, simmering fury, and she threw Michael out of the house. Vanessa, believing she had finally won, tried to console Laura, but Laura saw through her sister's manipulation. In a moment of clarity, Laura realized that Vanessa had been plotting to destroy her life from the start. The confrontation between the sisters was brutal, filled with accusations and years of pent-up resentment. Laura accused Vanessa of trying to steal everything from her home, her family, and now her husband. The atmosphere in the house became toxic. Laura and Vanessa were constantly at each other's throats, while Michael was caught in the middle, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. The tension reached its peak one fateful night, leading to a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The fatal confrontation and twisted aftermath. The tension in the house was unbearable. Michael, determined to end the chaos Vanessa had brought into their lives, returned to the house late at night. He found Vanessa in the living room, sitting on the plush leather couch, sipping wine as if she didn't have a care in the world. She smirked when she saw Michael enter, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of having control over him. She taunted him, suggesting that perhaps she had been lying about the pregnancy all along, just to see how far she could push him. The smirk on her face was showing the wicked side of her, and Michael could feel the rage building up inside him. He was done being her puppet. The argument that ensued was loud and vicious. Vanessa enjoyed pushing Michael's buttons, and she didn't hold back. She reveled in the chaos she had created, mocking Michael for being weak, for letting her manipulate him so easily. As they fought, the air grew thick with tension, and the line between rage and violence blurred. Just then, Laura, who had been upstairs, heard the commotion and rushed down to see what was happening. She entered the living room, only to find herself in the middle of a scene she couldn't comprehend. The man she loved and the sister she had once trusted were locked in a verbal battle that threatened to explode. Vanessa, sensing that her control was slipping, became increasingly erratic. She started to reveal the extent of her manipulations, how she had lied about the pregnancy, how she had pitted them against each other for her own amusement, and how she could ruin them both with a snap of her fingers. The truth hit Laura like a sledgehammer. The woman she had trusted, her own sister, had been deliberately destroying her life, and the man she thought she knew had been complicit in it all. The room was spinning, and Laura felt as if she couldn't breathe. But before she could fully process the betrayal, the situation took a deadly turn. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Michael lunged at Vanessa. The struggle was intense, chaotic, and brutal. Vanessa fought back with all her might, scratching and biting, but Michael's fury was overpowering. The room seemed to close in around them as they grappled, and in the heat of the moment, Michael shoved Vanessa violently. She stumbled backward, her head striking the edge of the marble fireplace with a sickening crack. Blood began to pool around her as she lay motionless on the floor. The once chaotic room fell into a deathly silence as Laura and Michael stared in horror at what had just happened. For a brief moment, everything was still. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock, each second amplifying the gravity of what had just occurred. Laura, in shock, couldn't move. She couldn't process the scene in front of her. The blood, the broken glass, the lifeless body of her sister. Her mind was a whirlpool of emotions. But one thing was clear. Her life had just taken a dark and irreversible turn. But Michael, in stark contrast, was already thinking ahead. His mind raced as he quickly began to formulate a plan. He realized that he could use this situation to his advantage, a way to rid himself of both Vanessa and the blame. With cold calculation, Michael decided that Laura would take the fall for Vanessa's death. He knew that if he acted fast, he could make it look like Laura had killed her sister in a fit of rage. And in her current state of shock, she wouldn't even realize what he was doing until it was too late. Michael wasted no time. He knelt beside Vanessa's body, making sure not to leave any fingerprints on her clothing. He then carefully dragged her body across the floor, smearing blood to create the illusion of a struggle between the sisters. He placed Vanessa's body in a position that suggested Laura had attacked her in a violent confrontation. Then he turned his attention to the murder weapon. Michael picked up a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart, a gift from his mother-in-law, and brought it over to where Vanessa's body lay. He wiped his own fingerprints from the decanter and then placed it in Laura's hands, guiding her fingers to wrap around it. Laura, still in shock and unable to comprehend what was happening, didn't resist. She had no idea that Michael was framing her for the murder of her own sister. Michael then planted Laura's fingerprints on the handle of a nearby letter opener, just in case the police needed more evidence to solidify the story he was about to craft. He carefully placed the decanter near Vanessa's head, positioning it in a way that suggested Laura had bludgeoned her sister in a moment of uncontrollable rage. He wiped down any surfaces he had touched during the process, meticulously erasing any trace of his involvement. Laura, still reeling from the shock of Vanessa's death, didn't notice what Michael was doing. She was too consumed by grief, guilt, and confusion to understand that her husband was setting her up. Michael took advantage of her vulnerability, playing the role of the concerned husband. He spoke to her in soothing tones, convincing her that they needed to cover up the incident to protect their family. He told her that she must have blacked out during the fight, that she had attacked Vanessa in a fit of rage and didn't remember doing it. He reassured her that everything would be okay, that they just needed to stick to the story he was about to tell the police. Michael believed his plan was foolproof. The scene was set, the evidence in place, and Laura was too distraught to question anything he said. He had crafted the perfect crime, with Laura as the unwitting scapegoat. The next morning, Laura, in a state of shock, called the police to report the accident. She was still struggling to make sense of what had happened, her mind foggy and disoriented. Michael stayed close to her, guiding her through every step of the process, ensuring that she stuck to the story he had crafted. When the police arrived, Michael put on a convincing performance, portraying himself as the devastated husband who had tried to break up a violent fight between his wife and her sister. Laura, still dazed and struggling to process the events of the previous night, repeated the story that Michael had drilled into her head. The police initially bought their story. It seemed like a tragic case of domestic violence gone wrong. They took in the scene, the broken glass, the blood, the heavy decanter near Vanessa's body, and everything seemed to line up with what Michael and Laura had told them. The police conducted their initial investigation, collected evidence, and took statements from both Michael and Laura. Everything appeared to be in order, and for a moment it seemed like Michael's plan would work. But there was one thing Michael hadn't counted on: Vanessa's phone. Unbeknownst to him, Vanessa had been recording their confrontation on her phone, intending to use it as leverage later. The phone, hidden beneath the sofa where it had fallen during the struggle, captured everything: the argument, the violent struggle, and most damningly, Michael's cold-blooded manipulation afterward. The police, during a routine sweep of the crime scene, discovered the phone. They initially thought it was just another piece of evidence to log, but when they played the recording, the horrifying truth began to unfold. The carefully crafted narrative that Michael had fed them began to crumble. They immediately realized that the scene had been staged, that Laura was not the cold-blooded killer Michael had made her out to be. Instead, it was Michael who had orchestrated the entire crime, using his wife as a pawn in his twisted game. The phone had captured everything: the moment when Michael convinced Laura that she had blacked out and killed Vanessa, the way he carefully placed her fingerprints on the murder weapon, and the chilling calmness with which he manipulated the entire situation. The police acted quickly. Michael was brought in for further questioning, but this time, the tone of the interrogation was different. The officers were no longer treating him as the grieving husband. They were treating him as a suspect. As the recording was played in the interrogation room, Michael's confident facade began to crumble. He realized too late that his foolproof plan had failed. The calm, collected demeanor he had maintained throughout the investigation began to crack, and the weight of his actions started to bear down on him. Laura, who had been sitting in another room, heard the recording for the first time. The realization that her husband had framed her for her sister's murder was more than she could bear. She was shattered, her world crumbling around her as she came to grips with the depth of Michael's betrayal. The police immediately exonerated Laura, understanding now that she had been a victim of Michael's manipulation, just as Vanessa had been. Michael, realizing that he was cornered, tried to negotiate with the police. He offered explanations, excuses, and even attempted to blame Vanessa for the entire situation, but the evidence was overwhelming and there was no way out. The police arrested Michael on the spot, charging him with premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, and attempting to frame an innocent person. In the end, the truth came out in the most unexpected way, revealing the sinister depths of Michael's character and the tragic consequences of Vanessa's manipulations. The Cartwright family was destroyed, and the haunting legacy of betrayal and murder left a permanent scar on all who were involved.